Alright, we're going in here. Prot Warrior. Relatively low item level because we don't want this to be too easy. And yeah. My build as a Prot Warrior is mostly focused on doing damage. Because more damage the better. Pretty simple. So yeah, as a Prot Warrior, you're still getting raged like any other warrior. But you got the one-handed weapon and a shield. And we still get all these nice mobility skills that are much more available this time around for warriors. With the you have the heroic leap and the heroic leap cooldown reduction and the charge cooldown reduction. Now
have we found any witches? We've been digging down here so long I can't even.
because I'm not doing any particularly difficult content, I'm in battle stance the whole time, not defensive stance. And our goal is pretty much to use all of our rage on revenge unless we really need to use an ignore pain to absorb some damage. So in this particular fight, Eric the Swift kind of runs around, and these other guys play melee basically. So you want to tank on Eric the Swift to keep them grouped up so that your team can AoE them as much as possible. So we'll look at talents later, of course. I'm using Ravager obviously for the good AoE damage. I don't know why I ignore pained right there. I should have done that.
Okay, we give up. You know, I think that tussle actually helped clear my head.
So yeah, we're Ravager for good AoE damage, and we're also on the Thunderous Roar. Is also good AoE damage. And of course the Rend with the Blood and Thunder on the Thunderclap for good AoE damage, bleed damage. So this fight's kind of annoying because these rock thrower guys don't really like to move much. If you had a good group, you'd like LOS them to clump them up better, but it's whatever.
I need to get closer.
Make sure you move out of that AoE. Doesn't hurt like crazy currently, but it stuns you, and it's generally a good thing to not get hit by.
I'm out of range.
Roma, cheat here, or I'll smash you.
This guy's gonna summon a bunch of ads that we're gonna roughly try to have aggro of. Then we want to tank on the totem here and kill it. As you kill the totem, then the boss and all the minions get spawned. Or spawn stunned. And yeah. Now we just kill him. Don't gotta worry about the ads at this point.
Bro, Mark, always.
So yeah, I'm going with this talent here where Demoralizing Shout generates rage and increases damage you deal to the targets by 20%. So Demoralizing Shout with that talent gives you more damage. It's awesome. So, tanking effectively is all about knowing your limits and the limits of your team, particularly your healer's ability to keep you alive. So, if you can grab another pack of enemies so that your team can AoE down more at the same time, then great. If you can't, then it's unfortunate, but sometimes that's how it is.
Halt! The unworthy will not enter this hallowed place.
I don't like team here.
Secrets will be protected.
So yeah. On this boss in particular, there's a mechanic where stuns, you want to stun him before he reaches full energy, and him walking through these circle things will stun him. I guess someone manually stunned him right before he walked into the circle there. Like how I used my own Stormbolt. Get rid of one of his little stacks. So that's what we like to see. So as long as you're doing the boss mechanic right, this boss is very easy. So we could have Ravagered there, of course, but kind of a waste on a single target situation. Whereas if we use it here,
Maybe we can find a few treasure maps. We'll have a look while you go on ahead.
if you have the opportunity, you want to stun these Earthen Weaver guys when they're casting Hail of Stone. It does a lot of damage to the whole party. But it's like a channeled ability, but it's not a cast that you can interrupt. And in this case, line of sighting these guys is pretty good. Hopefully our healer gets here before we die, though. I missed a Hail of Stone that I could have interrupted there. But yeah. We got these guys nicely grouped up because we line of sighted them around the corner. It's a general strategy that you want to do for whenever there's any kind of ranged enemies. You want to force them to run to clump them up. Stun that guy. This area is pretty easy, except for these bats do this sonic attack or something that silences people. So your healer will get silenced, and it can be a problem. Spiders also jump people, which is kind of annoying in that they're no longer an AoE. Which isn't a problem if your ranged DPS stacks up with everybody, but when your ranged DPS is farther away, then the spiders jump farther away. It's really annoying. So sometimes you just have to run as the tank to your ranged DPS because they're not really playing it right.
Protocol. Defend.
Oh, I had this on overall data the whole time. Whoops. I meant to...
Target acquired.
I want to keep it on the damage meters on current segment. So this guy has that own attack, which is something to keep in mind. And at this point, he becomes invincible, and you gotta kill these ads. So
Undesirable elements.
pretty easy, unless you got some dumbass who goes and stands in the center.
Target acquired.
I guess we'll just press some damage buttons that are AoE. Since our hunter's dead.
Target acquired. System shut down imminent.
Whoa! Look at all this stuff! The heroes. You could keep
So,
searching for whatever
as a
it is
tank,
you folks are after.
keep an eye on where your healer's at, their mana.
Dibs on this room. Safe travels all.
This pull isn't too bad, but in general. Oop, another Halo Stone that we can interrupt. And we'll save our Dragon's Roar thing for next pull. One is slightly bigger. And we'll do our Ravager. So this is how we get good AoE damage. So the big guy here does this AoE thing that does some AoE damage. It's not a lot though. So we can just kind of sit in it just to keep all the guys grouped up so we can AoE them down faster. And hopefully nobody aggroes those guys on the right. And they did. So hopefully we can LOS these guys over to here. He's got a little over there. I used the AoE taunt thing just now. The reason is there's a talent, which is pretty nice, which makes it also an AoE interrupt. So it's pretty good in these situations when there's multiple casters causing problems.
What have we here? Alexstrasza's lapdogs.
So that talent's
Right
over here.
Your queen her prize.
So it also reduces the cooldown to a minute and a half. So normally the AoE taunt is like 3-minute cooldown or something. These guys aren't too bad, so we're gonna bring them this way and grab another guy. These guys do this stacking debuff on everybody in the party, which slows you down and deals damage over time. Really annoying. It's a great spot to have like a restun for Master Spell. They're immune to stuns, otherwise you'd be able to just stun them and because the duration on the debuff isn't very long. Since you can't stun them, it can be a bit of a problem. I'm not gonna grab all 3 of them here. We're just gonna get all the whelps. We'll let these stacks clear off before we grab the other 2. Only takes a couple seconds. Alright. start the boss talking over here, so...
This disc may hold the secret to the aspects regaining their power, and we cannot allow that to happen. Now the disc is lost to time.
So yeah, generally, as a warrior, you want to ignore pain.
In all
When you're taking enough damage that enemies are going to actually use up the whole thing. And you don't really want to overlap other defensives with it in general. So you saw the sand breath thing that he does is a significant amount of damage that we took. So I should probably ignore paying that just to save the healer from having to do as much healing on me. Because there's a pretty good amount of AoE damage that the party takes on this fight. So we don't want to put too much stress on the healer. We're gonna jump here and thing because we got our haste buff, and then we do damage. Gotta love doing damage. I should have demo shouted, but I'm not doing this quite right. So,
efforts are impressive, but in vain.
yeah, we'll look at the damage breakdown in a second here.
Timelines are converging.
I got a nice 270 eye level ring, which will replace this one, so that's nice. Always good to get loot. Alright, so... yeah, we'll talk kind of big picture talent stuff real quick, and then we'll look at damage breakdown stuff, and then we'll look a little more in detail at the talents. So obviously LFG dungeon stuff isn't that difficult of content, so we're trying to just do lots of damage, make it go faster. You can definitely spec a little more defensively for doing harder content, but usually you want to do as much as damage as you can, not just to kill things faster, but also you need to do damage to generate threat so that the monsters attack you instead of your party members. Now, it's not a lot of damage compared to how it used to be, like back in the day. But in general, especially when ads get pulled, you want to have ways that you can do a bunch of damage to grab all the aggro really quickly. So
Anchors away.
Thunderclap doesn't do a lot of damage by itself. What it does do is, with this talent, Blood and Thunder, it applies rend to enemies. It requires you that you have this rend talent over here. Now you might notice I don't have rend on my action bars anywhere, and I think this is a design oversight, is that rend costs 30 rage, whereas Thunderclap is on a 5.2 second cooldown. It costs 0 rage. It actually generates 5 rage. So as a Prot warrior, I feel like they should make it rend costs 0 rage, because there's essentially no reason to actually have rend on your action bars as it currently stands. And also the way Thunderclap works, this other talent for Thunderclap, radius and movement speed reduction, is really bad compared to Blood and Thunder. I don't think you really would ever take Thunderclap. Well, maybe just because it generates rage and it's like free. But it's just a much weaker skill without applying rend to everything. So we'll look at our damage breakdown in a minute. But yeah, so that's one way you're getting AoE aggro. You are of course getting revenge damage. Revenge has a chance to be free when you dodge or parry. So and also rend applies deep wounds. Deep wounds isn't a lot of damage. Let's see what it tells me in here how much damage deep wounds is. Yeah, so you know, like 2% of my health over actually that's more like 4% of my health over 15 seconds. Like grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of damage, but because you apply it with revenge, it is going out AoE, so it, in the overall damage of the dungeon, deep wounds will come out as a decent amount of damage. But it's not great. So yeah, like I said earlier, if you don't need to be spending rage on ignore pain and also shield block. By the way, you generally want to ignore pain over shield block. Ignore pain will usually reduce more damage than a shield block, unless you're up against like raid bosses or other things that hit really hard. So yeah, so generally you don't want to have to spend rage on those. You want to spend your rage on revenge if you can, but not to the point where it makes the healer's life too difficult. If you're taking a lot of damage, definitely use ignore pain. Sometimes use shield block. Yeah, so that's some of your AoE damage. Like I said, I'm taking the Thunderous Roar down here for more AoE damage. This would be Dragon's Roar, and it didn't do all this nice AoE or bleed damage like it does now. But yeah, now it's very strong. If you get the cooldown reduction down here, and you can also get all bleed damage increased, which of course works well with the rend, thunderclap, bleed stuff, and your deep wounds. So there's also bleed damage talents over here for further increasing that bleed damage. Now that stuff's probably not good for raid tanking, but for dungeons it's pretty great. But like I said, if you're playing harder dungeons, if you're going into mythics and you're undergeared, then you're gonna probably go for a little bit more defensive on the talents. Like you might go for the stamina over here, and then the shockwave, which is a AoE stun ability. So that helps your survivability a lot more compared to this, which doesn't really do anything for your survivability. And then, yeah, your last big AoE thing is if you grab the Ravager talent down here. Ravager does a lot of damage, but it's physical damage, which gets reduced by enemies' armor. So, basically, it won't do as much damage as it says it does, but it's still a lot of AoE damage. It's not like BFA Ravager, where it gives you extra parry chance. I loved the BFA Ravager giving you parry chance because it was like, I can't remember how much it was. It was like 30% parry chance or something. But it just made you essentially invincible during Ravager, which was really great for Mythic Plus. But now it's just a purely damage thing. But yeah, overall, Warrior's great as far as you have a lot of damage options. I should say Prot Warrior is a great tank because you have a lot of damage options. And of course, like I said before, with all the mobility talents, you can move on to the next trash pack in a dungeon pretty quickly. Yeah. So yeah, that's the main idea of like the main important things so far in the talent trees. Let's look at the damage that we did. It's like I said, we're trying to do damage over the course of the dungeon. Against the Lost Dwarves, it's the little triple boss thing. So AoE damage works pretty well. You see we got Rend is the top damage, then Thunderous Roar, then Deep Wounds. We did lots of Revenge. We got a Trinket in there. Shield Slam and Thunderclap are farther down the list. Ravager's on there. But yeah, like I said, the Ravager damage wasn't it gets reduced by armor. It usually ends up lower than the Thunderous Roar damage, but also, well, I might have had 2 Thunderous Roar casts in there, I'm not sure. But also the I think I used the Ravager at a time where I didn't get the full damage of it. So could have been better with the Ravager there. But yeah. One of those lots of AoE damage things, so the tank usually does a pretty good job of keeping up with the DPS. I forget to look at what these guys' item levels were. If you go back in the VOD, you could see how much health they have. That usually gives you a general idea of what their item level was. But yeah, I generally do like to check. Bromok was the second boss. He spawns a bunch of ads, but dealing damage to those ads isn't very important. You really just want to deal a bunch of damage to Bromok and then kill the Quaking Totem when it spawns. Because A, it does a bunch of damage to the party, but also B, when you kill it, it stuns all the enemies. And I think it makes them take additional damage while they're stunned. We can check that real quick here. Dragonflight, Oldemon, Bromok, abilities, Quaking Totem. Yeah, increases their damage taken by 200%. So, yeah. So because of that, you really just want to focus on single target damage on the boss, and then single target damage on the totem to stun it, and then you can do AoE to clear all the ads, and then continue single target damage on the boss. Or depending on how low the boss's health is, you might just single target the boss. Like, that'll of course be basically depending on how overgeared the DPS players are. You could potentially ignore the totem completely if you're killing the boss too fast, or you don't ignore the totem, you kill the totem, but then you ignore the ads and you just DPS the boss down, single target. But yeah, so again, we've got a bunch of AoE damage on there. Looks pretty much the same as the Lost Dwarves, but it looks like I didn't actually use Ravager that fight.
Anchors away.
So yeah, the Rend and the Deep Wounds and the Thunderous Roar Bleeds are all pop damage. But you can see here the Hunter was higher, much higher on the damage that time. Sentinel Talandras. It's the one where you're supposed to just stun him. And yeah, it's as long as you do that stun mechanic as a tank, it's a very easy fight. I forgot to talk about damage taken in these fights. So the Lost Dwarves don't really do any significant damage unless you stand in the longboat raids thing, because it's a stacking damage over time if you get shot by the cannon shots. And then Bromok, that fight, you don't really take too much damage unless you don't kill the Quaking Totem. Then that Quaking Totem damage adds up on the whole party. But not much damage to the tank for you to worry about. So yeah, third boss, Sentinel Talandras. If you don't stun him before he reaches full energy, he does this enrage thing where he does like 50% haste buff or something. His stomp thing does a decent chunk of party-wide damage for the healer to deal with. But as long as you do the mechanic right as a tank, he doesn't enrage, and you don't take too much damage as a tank on that fight. So, but there's no opportunity for AoE damage, so our damage is relatively a lot lower since we're just stuck doing single target damage. So Rend actually comes up as our top damage there. Still, but it's not nearly as much as if we had multiple targets to apply the bleeds to. Let's see, next boss, the Emberon guy, who the Hunter died in that fight because I guess he didn't know the phase, how the phase worked. Where the boss goes to the middle and becomes invincible and does a bunch of AoE damage if you get in that little fiery circle. So yeah, our Hunter did a lot less damage that time, but he would have definitely topped the damage if he hadn't have died. Based on these other fights, the Hunter was top DPS. But yeah, it's all single target damage. Like I said, he does that cone attack where you take a bunch of damage. It's one of those times where it's good to use Ignore Pain to put a little less burden on the healer. But because It's one of those things. So for single target damage, it's more valuable to do the ignore pains as opposed to revenges because you're not getting multiple target damage out of revenge. So if you look at ignore pain, we can absorb with my current gear set about 8,000 damage, or for 30 rage we can deal 1,500 damage. So if there's multiple targets, then revenge will be able to deal a lot more damage, but just in single target, using your rage on revenge is a lot less appealing, obviously. You do, of course, still get those free revenges from dodges and parries sometimes, so we'll definitely still use revenges there. And there's also times where you're just not taking that much damage. So it's better to use a revenge than ignore pain. But when the boss does those hard-hitting type of things, you want to use that rage on the ignore pain. So yeah. And then of course just doing the mechanics right. You want to make sure you're facing that big cone attack away from your other teammates. Let's see. What's next? So yeah, in that case, we actually had Shield Slam as our top damage there. That was kind of interesting. That maybe partially because of the ads phase. I'm not sure. I might have thunderclapped less on the ads and did more shield slams. Shield slam doesn't really do a lot of damage. But there's a talent over here. Using shield slam increases the damage of shield slam by 5%. Stacks up to 5 times. So it does get a little bit better. But you're mostly using it, well, you're using it on cooldown generally. To generate rage anyways. But yeah, for single target damage, it is one of your better options. Yeah. Nothing else really going on here. Let's look at the final boss. So the final boss, he does that cone attack, which again, face away from your teammates. And on that one, I was definitely using Ignore Pain to, since that's kind of a better use of my rage there than to use it on revenges. Obviously, if you want to be greedy and do as much damage as possible, you're going to revenge. But then your healer has to do more healing on you. So the healer is doing less damage, and then ultimately, I think it's not worth it. So, yeah. That was a case where you ignore pain. And then there was that phase on the final boss fight where he does the reverse time thing, and then if you run in the bad circles, they actually give you a big haste buff. So you did a good bit of damage there. When you're playing with other people who aren't familiar with that mechanic, they will not run in the bad circles for the haste buff, and then they end up doing relatively less damage than you. So I'm not sure if the hunter did that or not. Let's see, what's that buff called? Is it showing here or not? I'm not sure if it shows in here. Because I'm not seeing it. Because it's like a... It doesn't put like a timed buff on you, it's a... zone or whatever. It might be in a different thing on here. Ours in Void Zone. Temporal Zone. Yeah, so 50% haste buff. So we can see here that the healer, myself, and... Well, the healer and myself were using that. The other warrior was in it for 2 seconds, but didn't really get much use out of it, and the hunter wasn't in there at all, so the hunter would have done more damage if he had used that mechanic, but he did not. So, yeah. More single target stuff where Shield Slam ended up being our highest damage. And I think that's partially because of that haste buff. You get, haste doesn't really help your dot damage compared to your actual hit damage. So, that's kind of how it goes. So yeah, I never went to defensive stance that dungeon. Defensive stance will reduce the damage you take by 20% and also reduces the damage you deal by 10%. So definitely a good thing to use when you are taking lots of damage.
Proudmoore's finest, at your service.
But you're also missing out on the 3% crit chance. So, you don't want to use defensive stance if you don't have to. I never used shield wall during the dungeon. 40% damage reduction for 8 seconds is nice and strong, but yeah, it's wasn't difficult enough stuff that I had to use that. You can possibly pull extra packs and then you're taking more damage and you might need to use that. In that specific dungeon though, a lot of the pulls have caster mobs, which or other mobs that are like dealing damage to other people in your party. Whether it's caster mobs doing single target casts or that hail of stones or whatever it's called, or the big guys that slam the ground for like 15% of everybody's health or something. Maybe it's 20%. I don't know how much damage it is, but yeah. Gotta keep in mind when you pull extra mobs, it's not only more damage that you're taking, it's gonna often be more damage that your party members are taking as well. So sometimes that gets out of control for the healer. Yeah. So other things, let's see. I didn't use Last Stand either. This gives you a big health buff for a little bit. I'm not a fan of Last Stand at all, but the talent tree does not actually allow you to skip it. You can't actually skip Last Stand, and even if you could, these other talents under Last Stand are really too good to skip. So, yeah. So yeah, the game kind of forces you to get last stand, even though I don't like the last stand ability at all. Similarly, I'm not really a fan of Rallying Cry. Just a temporary health thing. Obviously, it has usefulness in very difficult content, so you might have to adjust your talent tree accordingly, but for me, generally, it's a button I don't press, so I'm happy to skip it. Let's see. I used, like I said, the AoE taunt thing once. It's called Challenging Shout, except that you get the talent here, which replaces it, so that it interrupts spellcasters, so that when you have those multiple spellcasters, you can interrupt them all at the same time, and just strictly from interrupting them is great in that it prevents a bunch of damage from happening, but it's also great for just being able to group them up better when they're harder to AoE when they're too far apart. Let's see. What other stuff here? So I like the ability to remove fears, but on a case-by-case basis, you could completely skip that talent, especially for dungeons. Shadowlands has like sometimes where that ability is useful, but usually you can avoid being feared without any problems. And also some of those fears are sometimes they are mechanics that they don't actually fear the tank, they fear like DPS or the healer. So sometimes fears as a specifically Prot warrior, you have even fewer of those to worry about. So definitely something you could skip. Impending Victory, I love. All specs get Impending Victory. I didn't actually end up using it very much. I probably should have used it more. If we go to overall healing done, Impending Victory was only 5% of my healing done. I definitely could have done more. As you see here, we got Ignore Pain is the highest. Pain and Gain is... Pain and Gain. Over here, this is useful on all specs, but definitely you get lots of value as a Prot warrior on it. But as you can see, Ignore Pain's still gonna be your most healing if you use it as much as you should use it. Unless of course you're if you're like really over geared, then you won't get very much value out of Ignore Pain because enemies will be dealing a lot less damage to you. And also you'll have more like leech and stuff, which will make the Ignore Pain button even less worth pressing. But if you're appropriately geared for the content, most of your healing will end up being from your Ignore Pain. But like I said, yeah, if you do impending victory more, then it'll be a probably like 20% of your healing, maybe more, because it's 30% of your max health, which as a tank is pretty good. But usually, yeah, usually it's like, you know, a bunch of damage is incoming type of thing, so you ignore pain beforehand. So if your health doesn't dip below 70% health, then you don't get maximum value out of impending victory. So yeah, you can kind of save impending victory for more of those emergency situations, like only when you drop below 50% health or something, or you could just use it more often and get more value out of it. It's kind of up to you. Yeah, Hateful Strike's a trinket I got. We got a little bit of leech on there. I think there's a talent somewhere in here about leech. That's not what I want. Ignore pain. Oh yeah, so this talent here is what I'm using. 30% of damage you deal adds to your active ignore pain. This talent's okay. You could definitely do this other one instead. You are healed for 50% of the damage dealt by deep wounds. So obviously one makes your ignore pain better like all the time, and the other one, since it's based off of deep wounds, just kind of heals you all of the time. But yeah, the more you use ignore pain, obviously the more value this has. But if the monsters like break through your ignore pain, then your damage stops adding to your ignore pain until you use it again. So it's kind of it's good if you have like the right balance of the monsters not breaking through your ignore pain quite. Like, but if the monsters aren't breaking through your ignore pain, then you're not getting full value out of the ignore pain. So it's yeah, kind of a balancing act. The other talent here, you're healed for half the damage of your deep wounds, is probably more reliable. So if we go to damage done for the whole dungeon, yeah, for the whole dungeon, we did 780,000 deep wounds damage. So that could have been, with the other talent, 390,000 healing from that talent, and we would have had
Ardmore's finest at your service.
some lesser amount of ignore pain, so would have been pretty good. You gotta consider also the it's a overhealing consideration as well, though, where that will give you a lot of overhealing. Ignore pain basically is overhealing if the monsters don't break through it, but it doesn't show up here in the damage meters, so I don't know exactly how much damage or how much like healing of ignore pain like sort of got wasted. So you kind of just gotta keep an eye on your ignore pains and see if the monsters are doing enough damage for it to be
Anchors
worth
aweigh.
using or not. So that's why I specifically have a a weak aura thing for the little icon that shows when my ignore pain's up and how much absorption is on the ignore pane. So if the monsters aren't dealing much damage, then the number stays high, and then it's like, okay, maybe I don't need to press ignore pain right now. But if it goes down quickly and the ignore pain icon disappears quickly, then you know that you got good value out of the ignore pain. But at the same time, if they are breaking through it quickly, then you aren't able to do that much damage during the ignore pain to add to the ignore pain from this talent here. So just a bunch of things to keep in mind as a Prot warrior. Because yeah, you don't want to be trying to look up here to see if your ignore pain is still up or not. It's when you got all these extra buffs when you're in the dungeon from your teammates, especially like healing over time spells and stuff, things get too messy to be able to easily tell if your ignore pain is up or not. And you have to manually hover over the tooltip to see how much absorption is remaining on your ignore pain. So it's just not feasible really without a weak aura to tell you. Let's see. Yeah. Spell reflection's alright. Not terribly important. Will save you from a little bit of damage. Anything else I want to talk about on the talents? So yeah, you don't really have to go for Thunderous Roar. Like I said, Shockwave's good. Spear of Bastion's good if you want to kite enemies, but I think the damage is inferior to Thunderous Roar, especially because of the extra bleed damage talents. But of course you wouldn't you probably wouldn't get these 2 talent points over here without getting Thunderous Roar. Avatar is probably okay. I've never really liked it though, so I don't get it. Let's see. Yeah, that's about... Oh, I guess I got a couple more things to talk about for here. So yeah, you could do a little bit more damage if you were to get sidearm over here. But I wanted to prioritize other things. You could also get the Titanic Throw, so your heroic throw now deals damage to 5 nearby enemies as well. It's still got the minimum range of 8 yards though, so if you have a bunch of dudes in your face, you can't
Well met.
you can't heroic or Titanic Throw on them because they're too close to you. You have to be farther away. So it's not like a button that you can press for your DPS all the time. Have this bitter immunity button, but
Bravo's finest, at your service.
one of those things where for tanking in a dungeon, if there aren't enemies that are casting diseases or poisons or curses on you, then you get no value out of it. And specifically because it's on a 3-minute cooldown, well, it also heals you a little bit, but that's not really a big deal. Yeah, it's very specific for certain dungeons. Have very high damage diseases or poisons or curses type of thing. Or that dungeon, for example, there's enemies that curse you and it turns you to stone after a few seconds. Now they don't cast that on the tank, so it's not important in that case for a protection warrior. So you get more use out of it on that dungeon as a DPS. But the that kind of general idea is theirs. As far as dungeons goes, if there's some mechanic that's normally a big pain that you can avoid by taking that, then it's great. Otherwise, not important. Yeah, we could talk. I guess I didn't talk too much about this, but I skipped Rallying Cry. Useful sometimes. Generally not going to save the party from a wipe unless you're on super difficult content, though. Intervene is a nice mobility skill, but as a Prot warrior, it's like something more that you might get in like PvP, but you don't really need it as far as dungeons go. Because you should generally, like, to get into combat, you're charging at enemies, or you're heroic leaping, or if you need to avoid a mechanic, you're heroic leaping usually. You could theoretically intervene to an ally if you need to get out of some kind of mechanic, but usually that's not the case, or you heroic leap instead. So it's I have trouble finding good uses for intervene to make it worth actually picking up, unless, like I said, it's PvP. Because the intercepting attacks against your teammates doesn't really do anything if you have all the aggro like you're supposed to. Alright, let's talk about protection talents real quick. I don't want to talk too much more. Like I said, I'm not a fan of Last Stand, so I wish you could skip it, but you can't. And also this talent here, I think, is really trash because Last Stand, again, is a button that I just never press. This talent over here I'm not getting. Heroic Throw does 100% increased damage and inflicts deep wounds. You would definitely want to take this talent if you were getting the Titanic Throw talent down here. But if you're not taking that, then heroic throw damage does pretty much nothing. How much heroic throw damage did I do in that whole dungeon? 0.1% of my damage. Yeah, so I could make that 0.2 2% of my damage if I wanted to. Not too exciting. So yeah, the Prot Warrior talent tree requires you to get all but 2 points from these top few layers. So I don't actually like Devastator, but in order to unlock the next row of talents, you have to either get Devastator or Improved Heroic Throw or the Last Stand Rage generation. So I think Devastator is the least useless of these, but I prefer to have the Devastate button that you can just press whenever you want to
Moore's finest at your service.
to deal some damage. So unfortunately I'm stuck with Devastator. So there's occasionally times where it's times where like you don't have rage and your shield slams on cooldown, your thunderclaps on cooldown, and it's like you want to start attacking some enemy that you're not currently attacking. And I could put the auto attack button on that keybind, but then it's like there's times where if I press that, then it would turn the auto attack off when I really just want it as a like auto attack on only button type of thing, and it's
away.
I find it really annoying not having that Devastate button on there. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, these other ones are good talents, or at least they're better than their other options as far as getting down to the lower talents that you need to get. Now, I'm not a fan of this tree in that, for example, to get down to this talent, if you really like this talent, you have to get this talent, and you have to get at least one of these talents, and you have to get this talent, and you have to get one of these talents. So it's like, there's too much linear stuff in the Prot Warrior tree that just forces you to get some things that you may not want. But most of these are pretty good talents. Like I said, I like having the AoE interrupt. This revenge damage is nice. Each enemy hit by Thunderclap reduces the remaining cooldown on Demoralizing Shout by 1 second. That one's pretty good, specifically if you're getting the talent where Demoralizing Shout increases the damage you deal to enemies. If you're not getting this talent, then this talent is pretty weak. So, bunch of synergy there. Even with this talent down here, I don't think this talent's very important. You could definitely pull this talent out and spend it on like Tough as Nails over here. Tough as Nails is a pretty good damage talent. I was trying it on my other character. So it's damage to enemies when you block, which is not a ton of damage, but over the course of a dungeon, specifically when there's lots of enemies attacking you, it definitely adds up. for single target like raid bosses, this is probably a really bad talent, but for dungeons, this talent's pretty good. Let's see. Yeah, we need to get rend. Bleed effects have a chance to grant you rage is obviously really good when you have rend bleed and deep wounds on all the enemies, and of course thunderous roar bleed damage on occasion. So yeah, like I said earlier, you could get the deep wounds healing if you wanted instead of the damage as to ignore pain. Let's see. Spell block might be alright for very specific fights, but generally not very good. Let's see. Last stand stuff, which I never press. But since it grants you a shield block for its duration, shield block is not that great, but because it gives you 100% block rate, but block, if you look at the stats, reduces the amount of damage you from the blocked attack by about 50%. But you already have 40% block chance. So if you're going from 40% block chance to 100% block chance, we could do some math here. So let's say 60% of the time you're taking full damage. So that's let's say full damage is 1, then then you're taking 0.6 damage, and then the other 40% of the time you're taking half damage. So you're taking 0.4 times 0.5. So you're taking 80% of the like physical damage by default from your blocks. That's ignoring the dodges and the parries. Now if we look at if we have shield block for 100% block damage, then we have 100% times 0.5
Anchors away.
is 0.5. So we take 0.5 divided by 0.8 is 62.5% of the damage we would take if we didn't have shield block up. So specifically from like melee physical attacks. That's not counting any kind of spell damage or whatever that's going on. So it's sort of like a 37.5% damage reduction, I guess. It's basically it's good if you're taking tons of physical melee damage, but if you're not, then it's not very good. So yeah, I could see a world in which you get this talent, but I'm not terribly a fan. Let's see. Execute stuff. We didn't talk about execute at all. Execute is pretty far down, I think, on the damage meter. Yeah. 3.1% of my overall damage is from execute. And it's... I think it's your best damage per rage ability. Well, you only really have one thing that spends rage, which is revenge. So it's way better than revenge for single target damage per rage, but obviously you can only use it when enemies are low enough to execute. So we look at all our execute talents here. Well, that's not rage spending. Yeah. So unless you get the talent down here, executes usable on targets below 35% health, then without that, you're not really able to use execute all that much. I wonder what does this work out to? I'm just wondering, is execute cost effective compared to revenge for 3 targets, or maybe it's a 2 target thing? I think you don't use execute till you're down to 2 targets. Three times that's 45. Yeah. Because if there's 3 targets, you're doing about 4,500 damage total for 30 rage. Whereas execute for 40 rage will do you about the same amount of damage. So, yeah. You don't execute till there's 2 targets or fewer. And yeah, you just don't get too much use out of execute. So the execute talents on a Prot warrior don't seem that good. Yeah. Stamina and armor is good, but it's more defensive than I really want to be. For the content that I run. Any other interesting stuff? Well, not really.
Proudmoore's finest, at your service.
There's definitely quite a few decent options. I haven't actually tried shield charge. It could be done. But out of the talents here, it's one of those things. I'd probably remove the demo shout point here. But demo shout increasing damage to enemies by 20%. It seems pretty good to me, so I don't really want to give that up. So yeah, that would definitely though be a good ability to have.
Anchors
yeah. All these ones down here are just kind of hard to get into to really test, so I'm not really sure if they're worth it. It's like, you look at this, and this increases strength and armor by 5% and crit chance by 1%. So this point, even though it's kind of the gateway to getting down here type of thing, this point's actually really strong. So it's not like I want to pull that point out to spend it down here. Not that this point's bad. This point's great if you're doing something really difficult where you might get very close to dying at some points. But yeah. If you if you're playing real difficult content, then yeah, you'll need to go a little more defensive. But try to be as offensive as you can, basically. So yeah. I would think the Prot Warrior is currently great. I haven't played all the other tank specs yet here in the Dragonflight pre-patch. I've played the Blood DK. The Blood DK feels really strong. Mostly because of Death Strike allows you to get so much health back whenever you get chunked. I played a little bit of the Vengeance Demon Hunter. Not really a fan of the Vengeance Demon Hunter. I need to try it some more though. The damage of the Vengeance Demon Hunter felt lacking, and I hate the stupid sigil stuff. But what the Vengeance Demon Hunter is, what I haven't tried yet on it is the, what they call it, like, Spirit Bomb or something, Soul Bomb, something like that. There's some ability on the Vengeance Demon Hunter that's, pretty good damage if you can use it correctly. So I might like the Vengeance Demon Hunter if you if I can get better at that playstyle. But yeah, so I haven't tried the bear tank, the Guardian Druid. I haven't tried actually I did briefly try the monk. The monk didn't feel very good, but they had some patch notes about the monk getting buffed. The Brewmaster monk. For Celestial Brews getting buffed by like 40% or something, and then something about the healing orbs, I think. So the monk might be alright. What other tanks are there? And let me just log out real quick. See what I'm forgetting. No. Prot Paladin I haven't tried yet, I don't think. And yeah, that's about it. So Prot Paladin is they actually had patch notes also for buffing the Prot Paladin's Word of Glory. So Prot Paladin might be currently on the undertuned side also. But basically overall, from everything I've played so far and from what I've seen of other tanks, I think the Prot Warrior feels like the best tank currently as far as having good mobility, having good damage. I have seen the bear tanks do pretty well on the damage though, and the Prot Warrior is probably not the tankiest. I think the Druid and the Blood DK are probably tankier So yeah. I think the Prot Warrior is definitely the most fun to play currently. But that's very opinionated, of course.
Anchors away.
If you like the other tanks, then great.